everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Alastuey, and on this channel, you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. So if that sounds good to you and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Today is my honor to introduce Barry Laminack, who is a nationally touring stand-up comedian known for his wit, relatable humor, and engaging stage presence. Originally from Texas, Barry has performed at various comedy clubs and venues, earning a reputation for his hilarious observations on everyday life, relationships, and pop culture. Beyond comedy, he takes on the role of an engaging host on the widely followed YouTube channel, Barry on Sports, where he entertains fans with his insights and commentary on the world of sports. Welcome, Barry.
Wow, I gotta hire you to go on the road with me with that intro. That's the best intro I've ever had, stage or otherwise. Well done. Well done
Yes.
indeed.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I met you through the comedy circuit here in Houston, and so I know your work quite well. And so I just wanted to bring you on today to talk a little bit about the comedy stand-up business, which you have been in for quite a few years now.
Yeah.
But before we start, what inspired you to pursue a career in stand-up comedy?
Oh gosh, I didn't have a job. I was laid off. I had always wanted to be a stand-up comic, right? So I was probably 8 years old and I watched Bill Cosby's special called Himself. It was Bill Cosby himself. And I fell in love with it because I knew I was funny, right? Like I always made my parents laugh and my older sister laugh at the dinner table. I would tell them stories about eh, from school, right? I would do impressions of my teachers or other kids in the class and tell stories from the day and they would all laugh. And so it felt good. And of course, most comics are comics because they're the peacemaker at home when there's turmoil. And the way they cope with that is by making everybody laugh. And so that was my role in our family. And so I kind of knew that I had the ability to make people laugh. But when I saw Bill Cosby do it in front of people, I was like, oh, that's what I do. And you can do that for other people. And so it kind of dawned on me, even at 8, that's what I want to do one day. But I never really knew how. I never thought you could do it from living in Houston. I always thought, oh, that's an LA thing. You have to be out in Hollywood. And I was 38 years old and I had been laid off and I was sitting at home and I was sad and depressed. And I had just started working at a radio station, or actually, I just had a buddy of mine that worked at a radio station. His name was AJ Hoffman, and he introduced me to a gentleman named John Westling. And he was like, all right, because I had told AJ I wanted to get into stand up. And he goes, dude, go talk to my buddy John Westling. He's a stand up. He's fantastic. He's great. Maybe he can give you some pointers. And I did. And John gave me some fantastic advice about getting started. And 11 years later, here I am.
What was some of that fantastic advice?
It's so funny. So I go up to John and I introduce myself. And looking back on it now, I totally get it. But at the time, you don't know. But I was like, hey, John, my name's Barry. AJ said that I should come talk to you. I want to be a stand up comedian. I've been wanting to do this since I was 8. What do I do? And John's advice was just go watch as much as you can watch, go watch for 6 weeks, go home every night and write, and literally don't go up. Just go out every night and watch comedy and do that for 6 weeks. And so if you could go out 7 nights a week, if you can go to 2 open mics in one night and watch them all, do that. And then go home and write jokes and just go and observe and observe and observe and write for 6 straight weeks and then come back. And then I'll give you some advice. And I was like, that's peculiar. That seemed like really weird advice. I was thinking he was going to be like, oh, well, get on the tour bus. I'm going to take you around the world. And it wasn't. I was like, that was kind of weird. And I asked him about it. And he's like, and what he told me was, becoming a comic is like cooking rice. Like if you take the lid off too soon, if I tell you too much too soon, you ruin the rice. So I just gotta let you simmer. You just gotta get out there and see it and simmer in the clubs and in the open mics. And then when it's ready, when you're ready after 6 weeks, I'll take the lid off and then share with you some pointers about getting started. And when I look back at it now, the reason is because most people would never come back. Most people would be into week 2 and be like, "Yeah, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this." But I did 6 straight weeks. I went out as much as I could. I watched so much comedy, and what I ended up doing was I literally wrote some of my first jokes at open mics because I would see a joke and it would spark an idea on a topic, and I wouldn't write the same joke, but maybe it was about, at the time I was a little overweight. So maybe I had a fat joke that I wrote, or something else, maybe a joke about my marriage that was an idea that was sparked by somebody else. So I really was doing writing at the open mics, but I was also observing how to be a comic. I was observing what to do and what not to do. I was watching guys bomb, I was watching guys kill, and I was learning how to do both. And, so it was great advice. And after 6 weeks, I went back. I was like, "Hey, John, you remember me? I'm Barry. You said to go watch for 6 weeks," and I did, and I'm back. And he was like, "Well, okay, sit down," and the rest is history.
That's awesome. That's actually really brilliant advice. I would say if you're wanting to do something that's maybe intimidating or challenging, sometimes just baby steps and putting yourself in those environments to observe where there's less pressure on you. And then when the time is right, you're going to be
Yeah.
so used to it because you've been in that environment and that atmosphere. So I think that's really wise.
Yeah, it was great advice. And when people ask me, that's what I always tell them, is just I give them the same exact advice. I just say, just go watch and observe. And I do think I had an advantage being 38, I think is how old I was when I started. I do think you have life experience. I was working in the corporate world. I was a project manager for Fortune 50 companies. So I had managed, multi-million dollar projects. I wasn't a young kid wet behind the ears that didn't know anything about the world, right? So I was pretty astute. So I was picking up a lot in those 6 weeks, and I was learning really quick. And so I think that really helped me advance really quick as well. So I moved up once I started, I moved up a lot faster than a lot of other comics that started around the same time, not because I was better, but because of the advice I got and because I was older and I was able to process what I was seeing and put it to use quicker.
Yes, yes. One thing I observed about your comedy is that you can take that humor from everyday situations and, use your observations to come up with a really funny punchline. So I think that that's really cool that you've had that connection to make with your comedy.
Thanks. Yeah, it's called being old.
There's definitely pros and cons. I think, whether you're young, you might be a little more, just take the chance because you don't know better. But then you have some wisdom with living, and you can find the irony with life as you get older and mature and so forth.
Oh, that's so true. When you're young, you don't have a filter. There's a lot of jokes that I don't tell because, when you're older, you kind of do filter yourself more. And I watch some of the younger comics and I'm like, wow, I would have never told that joke, but good for them for taking the chance. But yeah,
Yeah.
when you have more life experience, you have a wider pool of material or situations to write material from. So yeah,
Yes.
there's pros and cons to both. And
Yes.
really, this is a business where a lot of times they're looking for younger folks. So that's a
Yes.
huge advantage.
Yes, we're definitely living in a time where, I mean, there is sensitivity around comedy and wokeness and all of this. And I would imagine as a comedian, that can be extra challenging because you guys are supposed to push the limits, supposed to push the buttons and say the things, the unsayable truths, that uncomfortable truths. And I see some comics hold back in this climate. Have you found that as a challenge trying to navigate, not get canceled and all of that stuff?
I, you know, For me, no, because you can't cancel somebody that's nobody knows.
I know you.
I mean, a really good example of that is somebody like a Joe Rogan. You remember a couple years ago there was that video that surfaced, and it was like 3 or 4 minutes long, and it was just Joe Rogan saying the N word
Oh yeah, and it was
over
all cut
and
up.
over. And it was like, and he even said, man, I sat down and watched it, and about 2.5 minutes in, even I was like, oh my God, Joe, stop. What are you doing? He was
Mhm.
like, it was a lot, but he didn't get canceled. He had just gotten that big deal with was it
Oh, Spotify.
Spotify? Yeah.
Mhm.
And the deal was there. And I think the reason that he never got canceled is because his fan base was like, we ain't going nowhere. Like, it's hard to cancel somebody if their fan base is still rocks with them. And so, yeah, I think that there are times when if your fan base or your sponsors or people abandon you, yeah, you're probably, that's what getting canceled is basically you lose your ability to do your job, earn a living, and do what you love. But plenty of people that, I mean, look at Shane Gillis, another great example. He did some terrible things in his past, lost his Saturday Night Live gig, and he came back and performed on Saturday Night Live, and he's
Yep.
killing it now. So yeah, and it wasn't even him saying uncomfortable truths on stage. It was just him being an a-hole and saying
Mhm.
terrible stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, and those are two different things completely, right? Those
Right.
are really just those
Right.
guys saying awful things,
Right.
as
So,
opposed to jokes that maybe make people uncomfortable, right? Like Ricky Gervais on stage, or Dave Chappelle with jokes about trans
yeah.
people. That's a big difference. But again, Chappelle's not canceled because
Hmm.
so many people enjoy his comedy, and
Right.
a lot of people agree with him. Whether you and I do or not doesn't matter. It's the
Right.
people that buy tickets and enjoy his comedy.
Yeah. One of my favorite comedians is CK Lewis, and he
Mhm.
definitely got in the news, got in trouble. I try to sometimes separate the art from the artist.
Mm.
You know, we've done that with
Yeah,
Michael Jackson. Love his music, don't like some of the stuff behind the scenes, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it can be difficult. I mean, you mentioned one at the beginning, Bill Cosby,
Mm.
classic comedian. Later on, all these,
Yeah. Yeah,
allegations come
I
out.
would like to point out, I liked Bill Cosby when I was 8 and nobody knew that he was a terrible person and was drugging women,
Drugging
and
women, yeah.
yeah, that was way back then, and
Hmm.
yeah,
That's what I was
that was
saying.
shocking.
The separating the art from the artist. I mean, it's gonna have that happens a lot of times, I think, with a lot of artists, a lot of creative artists. There's, some mental illness and some issues, but that's also what brings about some of their great art,
True.
unfortunately. Yeah.
And it's really about too, there's again, like I said, it's what you do on stage versus what
Hmm.
you do off stage, right? Louis C.K. he did some terrible things off stage to
Hmm.
women, but on stage he had some really questionable jokes too. I mean, he pushed the boundaries. He had a joke about oh, what was the name of the book? Oh, I forget the name of the book, but he used the N-word
Mm.
ironically in a joke. He wasn't just saying it. It was N-word Jim, and he just kept saying it over
Hmm.
and over, and it was very uncomfortable, and
Hmm.
nothing ever happened in that regard. It was the stuff he did off stage that got him in trouble. So yeah, it's two very different things.
Yes, yes. Another favorite comedian I have is Norm Macdonald. And one of the things he was known for was like bombing on stage, but loving the bomb and then being even more funny. So have you ever bombed? How did you handle that? What do you do with those types of situations?
If any comedian that tells you they haven't bombed is either lying or hasn't really done comedy, because
Yeah.
yeah, everybody bombs, and it's just to what degree and how many times, right? And one of my favorite bombs, and yes, we all have favorite bombs. I mean, not at the time. It's just awful going through it at the time, but those are some of your best memories and moments when you look back on it later. One of mine was it's the one I remember the most. I got asked to put together a show for a senior community. I don't know if I think it was an assisted living community down in Galveston, Texas, and it was their activity day or whatever. So thinking like a smart man, I went out and I got two. They wanted four comics. It was myself, and I went and got Kristen Lindner. And then I went and got Andy Huggins, who at the time was 73, 72, I think, maybe. And I got Dick Kendall, God rest his soul. He was 76. So yeah, I was, mid 40s. Kristen was mid 40s. So I went and got some comedians that were in their 70s, but I went first. And they stopped bingo to start comedy. And they were not thrilled about that. The seniors were not happy that they stopped bingo. And I was the first one. I was biting the bullet. So I'm literally 2 minutes in. There's people already asleep. No one's paying attention. Some people didn't even turn around from the bingo table to watch the comedy. And there was one lady right up front, and she's kind of just she's looking at the floor. She's not even looking at me. And I'm 2 minutes in, I think. And it's just an awful, uncomfortable silence. And it's really quiet, which you never want. I mean, a lot of times people say, oh, well, they're paying attention. They weren't. And I do a joke that always works, doesn't work. And in the silence, she doesn't even look up. She just goes, can we just go back to playing bingo? I still had 13 more minutes, and I was just like, oh my God. It was just 13 more minutes of dead silence. Nobody, which is a poor choice of word to use at an assisted living facility, but
Yeah.
it was awful. And no, I did not a single laugh, not a chuckle. I think one person in the staff would laugh, but it was because I was dying. And it was just awful. And then Kristen, I think she bombed. Andy Huggins didn't even do great. I think he acknowledges that. The only one that really did well that day was Dick Kendall. He crushed. They loved him. But I
Oh,
think it's because they could relate, he
yeah,
probably should have lived there, honestly. So that's probably why.
yes, yes. I mean, as a comedian, there's a lot of things that go on. You have to really read the audience, know thy audience, handle the hecklers. There's a lot of things that are happening. You have to like do your timing, get your joke right. How do you handle all the things you have to think about to deliver those punchlines?
You know, it, it's you experience. It's
Mhm.
really more than anything. It's about going through it and learning from it. And that's what I love about John. From day one, John Wessling has been a friend and a mentor. And there's so many times when I've gone through something and I've gone to John just as a friend to complain about it and just be like, dude, this happened. And John will be like, yeah, that sucks. What'd you learn? And so he'll go from friend to mentor like that. And I'll be like, well, I don't know, man. And he'll be like, well, you need to think about it because it's going to happen again. What'd
Mhm.
you learn? And so then I'll turn it into, wow, what did I learn? What am I going to do next time? And he'll sometimes help me with that because he's been through it and I hadn't, or that was my first time. And that really happened a lot early on, but now I'm 11 years in now. So it's not like I don't, I still see stuff for the first time, but a decade plus in, I'm able to process stuff a lot better. I remember a couple years ago at a show, I had a lady, she just fell out. She was walking and she just fell down and not like just slipped, like she just passed out, just not even fainted. I think she just collapsed, just face first on the floor, and it was loud and it was crazy. There was pandemonium. People thought she died.
Mhm.
And I was like 10 minutes into a 30-minute set, and I'm like, oh crap, how am I gonna get we had to stop and
Yeah.
get her, make sure she was okay. That was the most
Mhm.
important thing.
Mhm.
And then you got to get back, and then everybody's got to regroup, and then I've got to regroup, and we got to do a show again. And you just
Yep.
kind of, yeah, you just kind of learn from you pull from other situations
Mhm.
where maybe there was a pause in a show. And
Mhm.
so it becomes a muscle, though. It
Yep.
becomes dealing with hecklers is a muscle, dealing with uncomfortable situations. Just the other day, I was doing a show and we were using a cordless mic, and the mic cuts out 30 seconds into my set at the punchline of my first joke. And you just roll with it. I've done shows where the lights have gone out. I've done shows where the mic has stopped working, and I've literally just shouted my entire set to the crowd. Like, you just go with it, and
Mhm.
try to be quick witted and make the best of it. Now, sometimes the best thing to do is just acknowledge it, even if
Yep.
you're bombing.
Yep.
Sometimes if you're bombing, the best thing to do is just go, wow,
Yep.
this sucks, doesn't it? And then
Yep.
everybody goes, yeah. And that sometimes fixes it. It gets them
Yes.
on your side because
Yes.
even you acknowledge it. And
Yes. Yes. I saw Steve Brin a few weeks ago. He's really good at that. He knows how to like, kind of work the crowd and go with those bombs and stuff. So yeah,
oh, yeah.
definitely good skill to have.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through the process of booking gigs and managing your schedule as a stand-up comedian?
Yeah. So that's probably one of the things that I despise most about this business at the level I'm at. I wish I was big enough to have a team and an agent and a manager and folks that handled all that for me. But unfortunately, until you get to that level, it's all on us. And really, what it is, I liken it to being a salesperson. And if you know anything about sales, and all the salespeople that are listening to this or watching this later will really appreciate this. And I did sales for a while, so I kind of understood this. But in sales, you're taught you got to get through the no's to get to the yes. And that's what I used to teach some workshops at the Houston Improv before their open mic. And that's what I would always tell young comics when it came to emailing bookers or reaching out to bookers to get on shows, whether it be locally or on the road. It's a numbers game. The more you email, yeah, you're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of rejections. It happens all the time. It's kind of like in sales, if whether you're cold calling or whatever it is you do, you're going to get told no a lot. And so they teach you, well, you just got to get those no's out of the way. You just got to get them all out of the way so you can get to the yes. And that's kind of how it is booking gigs and getting booked at clubs or wherever. You got to get all those no emails out of the way so
Mhm.
you can get to the yeses. Unfortunately, in this business, you don't even really get a no. You just don't get anything.
Don't get
You'll
an answer.
email, oh gosh, no, you'll email 100 bookers.
Mhm.
You'd be lucky to get 3 replies.
It's just like cold calling then in sales.
Yeah. Yeah, if people if they answer, like this, but it's notorious. And I used to get really upset about it. It used to really bother me because I would be like, well, how hard is it to just hit reply and be like, nah, I'm good. I'll pass. No, thank you. But then you got to remember, I'm one comic sending one email to one booker. They're one booker getting 100 emails a day from several thousand comics around the country. And so then I was like, oh, okay. Well, that kind of makes sense, right? If they want to book me, then they will reply, but that's essentially a no if you don't hear from them. So it's the same thing.
Mhm.
What's the difference between not getting an email and getting an email that says no? It's still a no.
Mhm.
It's not a yes. So I kind of had to rationalize that in my mind and not be so stubborn about getting a no. So yeah, that was getting over that was kind of difficult. But it's kind of like writing jokes. It's the same kind of thing when you first learn how to write jokes, or when you first become a comic and learn, you write everything. Every idea you have, every joke you think is going to be
Mhm.
killer and the best, you write everything down, you write every joke, and you do them. You do them
Mhm.
all, and you try to do them all, and
Yeah.
99% of them are going to be terrible. They're not going to work. They're going to
Mhm.
bomb. You're going to go to open mic. They're going to suck. And you get rid of all those. And you might sit down and write 30 minutes worth of jokes, and 2 minutes of it might be really good stuff that you can keep and work
Mhm.
on and perfect. And
Mhm.
that's the game of writing jokes. That's
Mhm.
the game of getting booked too. So,
Yep. All
yeah.
comedians have to be really good with rejection, like you said, whether you're getting rejected by the clubs, getting rejected by the crowd, and then also having the resilience, because that's part of being a comedian. Let me ask you about I don't know, who could be a big factor in this. I know we know the Joe Rogan effect with all of the comedians that are his buddies. He puts on his shows and books at the mothership. Like, it's easy if you're a part of that in crowd, but if you're not, it can be very hard. So there's a little bit of a like popularity thing going on over there. It's almost high schoolish to me, if you think about it. Have you tried to get over there to the comedy mothership? I mean, isn't that like the Mecca right now?
I have not even attempted to go to the mothership. It's really not my lane.
Okay.
It's not. I think there's I, I think the tendency would be to, oh, I got to get out there.
Hmm.
But I think self-awareness in this business is really important, whether it be on stage, because oftentimes you hear a comic come off stage where they just bombed or did really bad, and they'll be like, man, I killed. And it was like, who? Yeah, yeah, they don't, a lot of young comics don't recognize. And the same is true for knowing your lane and knowing what is going to be beneficial for you. And me going out to the mothership and maybe getting 1 minute on Kill Tony 11 years into my career, if we could call it that, isn't really gonna, that's not my lane. That's usually a younger audience. It's usually a younger comic. Could I catch lightning in a bottle? Maybe so, but I mean, I'm gonna turn 50 in 7 days.
Happy
My
birthday.
crowd is
Me.
yeah, my crowd is married couples, and it's people 25 to 65, like it's not, they don't watch Kill Tony. My for the most part, a few of them might, but for the most part, my crowd is gonna go to the comedy clubs, or they're gonna stay home and either watch sports or Bridgerton, one of the two, like, or
Mhm,
both. So yeah, you just got to know what your lane is. But you're right, it is very much about who you know. And Andy Huggins, a good friend of mine, also a good mentor, taught me everybody has a clique. I used to get real mad the first year that I really didn't have any friends in comedy. I mean, I had friends, but none in the business. No comics would hang out with me at open mics. Everybody had their own clique. And it really kind of bothered me because it was very much like high school. And I was like, well, this is stupid. First of all, I'm a grown ass man, so I shouldn't be worried about it. But it does bother you when you see everybody else hanging out and talking, and you're kind of excluded from that. But then I kind of learned that it's a feeling out process and it's a test, because then you learn that so many comics come and go within the first 6 months to a year, that you don't want to take the time and invest in it, and then they be gone, and then you're like, well, I just wasted a lot of time trying to help this person or get to know this person, and then they quit because they couldn't hack it, or they're not really into it, or they were just here to hang out, or they weren't taking it serious, or it was a hobby. And for me, I'm serious about it. So I kind of got it after that. But yeah, everybody should have a clique. Everybody should have friends that they hang out with. And Andy told me, find yours. Don't be jealous about theirs that they have. Go find yours. And I was like, you're right. And I did. And so,
mhm,
I have my friends, and I found mine. And um, the way I got into comedy clubs on the road was because of who I knew, and them taking me on the road and getting me in. And that kind of spiraled into meeting more people and them recommending me at other clubs. And it's a people business,
mhm. You gotta
first and
network,
foremost.
put yourself
First and
out there.
foremost, it is
Mhm,
absolutely 100% a people business. I don't care how funny you are on stage. I don't care how brilliant your jokes are. If you're a terrible hang in the car, if you're boring or you're obnoxious,
yeah,
no one wants to go on the road with you. No one wants to ride 6 hours or share a hotel room with you. It's going
mhm,
to be difficult. It's going to be
yep.
really difficult. No one wants to share a green room with you. So if you're a good hang and you're an okay comic, you'll work more than an obnoxious comic that's funny.
Yeah, there's a level of professionalism that definitely needs to come through if you want to stay in the business, because like you said, reputation will follow you.
Oh yeah.
So let me ask you about the role of comedy clubs and the venues play in the success of comedians. And I saw in a other interview with you with Slade Ham, and you guys were talking about how you're required to have your social media numbers up and all this pressure in order to get booked. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a newer kind of revelation in the business. The business is always evolving. When I first got in 11 years ago ish, 2013, I think it was April of 2013 when I started. But when I started, that was still kind of the era of having a TV credit, right? That was still a really important thing. The business model has kind of always been predicated on how can I sell you as a comedy club? What can I do to get an audience that may not know who you are to want to buy a ticket to come see you if they don't know who you are?
Mhm.
Obviously, they're going to come buy a ticket if they know you, but those comics can be really expensive. And if they're at a level where they're really well known, they might not work your club to begin with. So there's this balance of, well, okay, I've got to book comics that maybe nobody knows. So how do I market them? How do I do? So that becomes credits. And the big one was, do you have like an HBO special? That's where it started. Do you have an HBO special? Do you have or you on Johnny Carson? That was the first one, was like, were you on Carson or Leno or Letterman, and then it rolled into HBO specials and Showtime specials, and then it morphed into Comedy Central, or no, sorry, then it morphed into like Last Comic Standing and Comedy Central specials, and then it was Netflix, and did you have a Netflix special? And now it's all about social media numbers, and that's where we're at in the business right now. So you could have, I have a dry bar special. I've done some really cool things, but none of that matters because my social media numbers aren't there yet because I didn't take it serious enough early on and I lagged behind. And instead of leaning into that when I should have, I was like, look at all these comics on social media. Ugh, just get in the club and do, which was a huge mistake. They all passed me by. They all passed a lot of us by, and they're the ones getting booked because they sell tickets. That's the name of the game. It's a butts and seats business.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, a club has to be able to pay everybody and pay their bills and make money. And the way you do that is sell tickets and put butts in the seats so that they buy alcohol and food. And, that's how you make money. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you can't sell a ticket to somebody, what do you do? So having a big social media presence and being a draw, even if nobody knows, if you don't know who they are, if they've got 100,000 followers or 200,000 followers or a million, yeah, they're always going to get booked over somebody like me that maybe has 2,000 Instagram followers. I might be funnier than them, but that doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see this going? 5, 10, 15 years down the road, if we keep on this, this trajectory?
I don't know because it always evolves.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you in the days of Carson, no one would have ever predicted Comedy Central. And in the days of Comedy Central, no one would have ever predicted Netflix.
Yeah.
And or even HBO, because cable wasn't around when Carson first started, and when HBO specials were around, Netflix didn't exist. And then when Netflix was first around, social media was a wee little baby, and so no one would have ever thought that social media comics existed. So I don't know what the next thing is. I have no idea. Maybe it's text comics. Maybe I just start texting everybody my jokes.
Yeah.
Everybody send me your phone number. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. I mean, you can if you want. I'll put you on my list. I won't text you spam jokes,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know, but I think
AI has got to factor in here somehow. Everybody's thinking how AI is taking over everybody's jobs.
you're
And I'm like,
probably right.
are we going to be laughing at AI comics and forget like human
Um,
comics?
you know, I I'm not gonna say no. What's concerning is how many comics are going to be AI comics, right? And how many of them are going to use AI to punch up their jokes? And most of us would never know and will never know
Yeah.
whether AI wrote their jokes for them or not.
Yeah. Or
Hopefully, I'll be
maybe,
dead by then.
yeah.
Just kill me now if that's where we're headed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly,
Or I wonder if like humor changes. You know how humor can change through
oh
generations?
sure,
Like,
because I mean, remember vaudeville, and then
yeah.
it was we went from vaudeville to, I mean, heck, we went through
The
the
Three
Eddie Murphy
Stooges.
phase,
And
yeah, Three Stooges, and then you had like Richard
I Love
Pryor and
Lucy.
Carlin and
Yep.
Murphy and Eddie Murphy, and then we're the '80s. Well, we rolled
Yep.
up our sleeves and we left the mic in the stand, and
Yep.
so now we're here. And then we went through the I don't know, the kind of the emo edgy comic phase with Janine Garofalo with her notebook on the
Yep.
stage.
Grunge.
Yeah. And then here we are now where it's internet comics.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
make 30, 60-second YouTube clips and they
Like
go out
a,
with 10 minutes of material, but they sell 3,000 tickets and no one cares that they can't get
I
past
know.
10 minutes.
I know.
Who cares?
Like a Matt Rife. I never heard of this kid. And then all of a sudden he just blew up, you know?
Well, you're right, but it's kind of like a lot of people's like, man, that Kevin Hart came out of nowhere. Yeah, it only took him 20 years to become an overnight success. Like, and it's true. Matt Rife did kind of blow up, but he had been working like
Oh,
he
he
had.
had? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's older than I thought. Okay.
Yeah, he had been working with, I want to say Ralphie May.
Mm.
He had done like Wild and Out, so he was on TV for a while.
Mm.
doing like an improv show called Wildin' Out on MTV. So he had been out in the clubs, and that's usually the case. I know several comics that are big now that had kind of been grinding, and either they got lucky on TV, but a lot of them that I know, they had just been out in the streets getting grimy like the rest of us, grinding it out and club to club or whatever, and just got
Mhm.
lucky on social media. And that's really what happened to Matt. He just posted a video, it went viral, and he was smart enough to capitalize on it in a great way. And the guy I just worked with not too long ago kind of happened the same way. He was just a feature comic working the road, and during the pandemic, he threw some stuff against the wall and something stuck and he went viral. And now he tours and he's killing it, And I
Awesome.
know a ton of comics that's the same story.
Huh.
So, yeah,
Interesting. Well, so how do you stay motivated with comedy and the
bills.
business and all of the
I'm just
downsides?
kidding.
Huh?
I'm sorry. What was good? I said bills. What was the
Bills,
question?
yeah. I mean, it is a side, it's part of your income for sure.
Yeah.
Would you still have a desire, I think, of doing this, like at the age of Andy Huggins and so forth?
I think so. If I wanted to do it to when I was 8, I'd still want to do it at 80. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I've loved it my whole life. My biggest regret, I think, in life is that I waited until I was 38 to try it.
Mhm.
That I waited 30 years instead of starting at 18 or 28.
Mhm.
So, that's the other thing. I look around and I see comics now that I know that are friends of mine that are 24, 26, 30, 35. And I'm like, man, gosh, I wish I would have started this, 10 years sooner. I think
But
about how much further I would be.
but also the time that they're jumping in, I think would be the easiest because we have such access that you didn't have 20 years ago with the internet and the contacts, and people just know more, and have stuff available to them.
I thought that, at first, Lisa, but then it's like, it's also way more saturated and way more competitive too, right?
Right.
Yeah, it is, we do have a lot more tools at our disposal than comics 20 years ago. That is 100% true. But there, you can throw a rock and hit a comic now. Everybody's a comic, everybody's a stand-up, everybody's funny, everybody has a channel or a social media handle and tells jokes. And so there's a ton more competition out there too. And like I said, you're seeing comics, and it's happening to me where clubs that I used to work and headline, they're not calling as much because they're starting to use these social media comics that have a bigger following that sell more tickets. And that's the reality of the business. So is it better now? Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, I could connect with a guy that, maybe was already connected, and he would take me on the road to feature. And then I could kind of parlay that myself,
Mm-hmm.
being really, really funny and kind of connected with a few names, and really, and pay was better. Let's be
Yes.
honest.
Yeah. Well,
Comics don't get raises, so don't get me started on that. The
oh,
pay now
I
is the same pay as it was 20 years ago. Actually, probably less.
okay, wait a sec. That's what I wanted to ask you about, the pay and the negotiation and so forth. So that's kind of, dang, with inflation and everything, I'm not surprised. There's other occupations where you're just like, why hasn't the pay gone up? But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you're a name, when you're a draw, when you're established, Matt Rife ain't struggling, and even headliners that have been established for years and years and years, guys that have, worked these clubs and the circuits for a really long time. Their pay hasn't necessarily gone down. It probably hasn't gone up a lot. They probably haven't been getting a raise at 3% every year, but where they're at is probably pretty decent. But I can tell you that in talking to Andy Huggins, who is a 40-year vet,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe 40-year vet in the business.
Since the
uh,
80s.
we would spend a lot of time on the road together. Andy was really good to me and took me on the road a lot. And again, comics, if you're watching this, the reason he took me on the road wasn't because I was the funniest comic he knew. It's because I was a good hang. I would drive, and we've never talked comedy. We talked baseball and soul music. That's what we had in common. So I was a good hang. And then later we would talk comedy, but it wasn't like, because Andy is so great and he's such a prolific joke writer that most comics, as soon as they get in the car, they'd start running jokes by him. And he'd be like, I don't want to do this. You know, it would get, so I never did that. And that's why I ended up getting a ton of work and we became friends. But
Mhm.
we started talking comedy, and he would say how when he was doing comedy in the 80s and 90s, like as a MCs would go on the road, and hosts and MCs would make as much as features make now. So, and for those of you that don't know comedy that are watching this, the hierarchy of comedy, there's usually a three people on a show, and it's usually the MC who goes first, and they're usually the least experienced comic. They do the least amount of time, and they usually get paid the least. And then the feature act is next. They're usually an up and coming comic. They're getting their chops. They're usually pretty funny, and soon they'll be headlining, and they'll make a decent amount of money, but it's more than the MC, but it's nowhere near what a headliner would make. And then the headliner is obviously the main attraction, and they're going to make the most money. But back in the day, MCs would make good money, get a hotel. You could make a living as a comic as an MC on the road. Nobody travels as an MC now. Clubs pay MCs $50, maybe,
Wow.
maybe. I know some clubs that would pay an MC for the week less than $200 a week.
It's not
You
even your
can't make a
gas
living
money.
doing that, huh?
That's not covering your gas money.
Yeah, if you're driving, yeah. So you can't do it on the road. You just can't do it on the road. And I can tell you this, in over 11 years, some of the clubs that I've worked, where I started featuring at, they still pay features the same thing. There's never been a cost of living raise. There's now, I will credit where credit is due. There's a couple of clubs that have bumped me when I started headlining.
Mhm.
My second or third time through, they gave me a couple $100 extra. But it's not like you're getting 3 or 5% every year, year over year. You just don't get raises as comics. I mean, I can tell you there's guys that have been doing this 30 years that say features still make what they made 30 years ago.
So
It's crazy.
you're independent contractors getting 1099s, I guess. And so can you negotiate, but you might negotiate yourself out of the job? Is that what
Well,
happened?
yeah, because it's one of those things where this is why so many, well, not so many, but a lot of comics sit there and argue for a comedy union, because there's always a comic willing to do it for less and undercut everybody else. And
Yeah.
so,
That's a
yeah,
lot. That's
there's
like real
if
estate agents. That's a lot of professions.
oh yeah. And so if I'm saying, look, I'm worth, as a feature comic, I'm worth $1,000 a week because I'm hilarious. Then go, yeah, but I can find another guy who'll do it for 500 that won't screw it up. I don't care if he's hilarious, just don't mess it up and ruin the night, because I just need the headliner to be hilarious. It's like, okay. So I can either do it for 500 or not do it. So you're really, and you kind of have to continue down that path of doing it. Well, that you used to, if you eventually wanted to headline at these rooms, but that's, again, now you have the internet. Just get you 100,000 followers and screw all that. Just go straight to headlining.
Mhm.
Then you can negotiate because they're your people now. But if
Yeah,
you were coming up traditionally, nah, you
the
took what
game's
you could get.
changed.
Yeah, because if you don't have an agent, if you don't have a manager, if you're a no name with no credits and you're just getting in the business, you're not negotiating.
Yeah,
You're told what you're going to get, and you're happy because you're getting work. You're on the road and you're getting stage time and you're getting paid for it. It's one
right,
of those
right.
things. Just be happy you're here, kid.
Mhm.
And you are. And then you look up 4 or 5 years later and you're still making the same thing. You hadn't been moved up. I had one guy tell me, yeah, Barry, you should be headlining my clubs. You're hilarious. You're great on stage. You're great off stage. You do all the right things, but I got 52 headliners. You just need somebody to die.
Oh my gosh.
Like, damn. And that's
Wow.
true. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's true. So it's you don't get in this business to make money
Mhm.
early.
Mhm.
You had better, it's you plan on being in it for a while.
Right, right. And it's what you make of it too. I know like Slade, like he did his own independent special. He's not waiting for
Mhm.
Netflix. He just did his own, and I think that's
It's
fabulous, you know.
fantastic too. If y'all haven't watched it, go watch it.
Mhm.
It's great.
Yep. Is that
Yeah,
something
and that's
you'd
the
be
thing.
interested in? Making
I
your
tried to do it a couple of years ago, and there was some logistics issues. The place where I had booked it double booked my night. And they gave me some reasons why they had to choose the other people over me. And
Mhm,
um, I was like, well, I'm one of those guys where everything happens for a reason. And so I
mhm,
was like, well, you know what? It must not be time yet.
mhm,
And maybe that was just me being lazy and quitting and giving up because I was like,
mhm,
well, it just must not be time to record it yet. And I think that was 2021.
mhm.
And so I was like, well, so I just never revisit it. But yeah, I wanted to
Yeah,
record an album and a special. And
yeah.
I had a deal where I was working with a production company that was going to record it and get a distribution deal with Tubi, which was paying really good money at the time for
Mhm,
stuff like that. And then
mhm.
that fell through. So yeah, I'm one of those guys that if stuff like that happens, I just go, forget it. I'll just go hide in my room and just cross my fingers and hope something good happens.
Yes, yes.
Going back real quick, I just want to say, because I think it would be derelict of me not to mention that on the road as comics, one thing we do to make some money, especially as a feature and even as a headliner, really, because you're headlining B rooms, you're still not making a ton of money, is selling merch. That's how you supplement and make money. There's a ton of times where selling shirts or even koozies, I'll make more money in a weekend doing that than I will what the club pays me. So I say that to say to your audience, if you go to a club and watch a comic, especially one that's not headlining, but even the headliner, if you enjoyed them, buy their merch.
Mhm,
That's a great way to support that comic as they attempt to try to earn a living and climb the ladder and eventually become a success in this business, because they're not getting paid a ton of money at these clubs.
mhm,
Unless you're watching a name that you know of at the Houston Improv or wherever, and then they they have a ton of money.
mhm.
But if you know this is a comic that nobody has heard of, chances are they're not making a killing. So buy their merch. It
Yeah.
helps. And same thing
That's
with bands. Say any performer on stage uses a microphone that has merch. There's a reason they have merch. It's
mhm.
because they're not making a lot of money from the
Yeah.
venue or the booker or promoter.
Mhm,
That's how they make their money.
mhm.
It helps.
Yeah, it's like a tip jar, but you get a t-shirt.
It is. You get something out of it.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So looking back at I remember in the 90s where, looking at some of the big comedians at that time, like Andrew Dice Clay, Dane Cook, I mean, they drew big crowds. It was almost
Mhm.
like rock star level. It was insane. And I think today we're not seeing those big rock star crowds, and maybe unless you're Dave Chappelle or something, but um could that be because of the changing dynamics of comedy and people just saying, you know what, that's not my lane. I'm staying in this lane. I'm never going to be a rock star comic, and I'm just going to
I
continue
mean,
this
I
way.
we do have some. I mean, Kevin Hart is huge, and he'll sell out stadiums. There are some. Um,
But isn't that it fascinating that that a comic has gotten to rock star level? You know
yeah,
what I mean? To
yeah.
me, it's really interesting.
I think that maybe one, there are so many that attention is a little bit divided, but I think the big reason that maybe you don't see as many shows like at the here in Houston at the Toyota Center or and there are comics. I think Andrew Schultz just did Madison Square Garden. So there's still comics doing big venues, but I think that rock star status, like you said, maybe doesn't feel that way because we're currently in a micro consumption society, right? Where used to you didn't get a lot of comedy. You didn't have access to 1,000 jokes in one night. If you think about it, Lisa, in one night on your phone, if you scroll, every joke on the internet right now is between 15 and 60 seconds. That's what I know when I make jokes, when I'm editing videos, I try to keep them 60 seconds or less. So if you're scrolling for 30 minutes and your big thing is you're into I mean, think about how many 60-second jokes you'd see in 30 minutes. 30, right? But if they're 15 seconds or what, so in a week, how much comedy could you consume? How many jokes would you see? You don't need to go to a venue like that. And you're
Yeah.
seeing them from so many comedians that I even asked a few people, I'm like, when you see a joke that you love, that you just think is hysterical, do you click like on the joke? And they're like, yeah, I'll hit the little heart button. I'm like, do you follow that comic? They're like, "Ah." I'm like, well, therein lies the rub. It's
Yeah.
really hard to get that follow. And for
Yeah.
comics now, that's the
Yeah.
that's the that's the money. That's the value
Yep.
is we're fighting for that follow.
And you're also fighting non-comics who think they can be comics. I've seen, for example, a few years ago, I was like, Stormy Daniels was headlining a comic club here in Houston. And I was like, wait a minute, she's never paid her dues. What's going on in the comedy world that's allowing this?
There are eh, everybody, it seems like it's super frustrating, but it seems like everybody that gets something happens, the first place they head is to the comedy clubs, whether it be like or wrestlers, like and God, I'm not knocking it. I mean, hell, I opened for Mick Foley, great guy,
That
super
that
nice guy, and
that
he's
porn
funny.
that porn star, the guy that he's really repulsive looking.
Ron Jeremy,
Yes, he was
yeah,
another one at the comedy club. I was like,
yeah,
wow.
but it's like that's where they go, because where else are you gonna go? Where else is there a venue that has a stage with staff and food and drinks and a microphone and a DJ or a sound person and all of the things that you would need to put on a live performance,
But as a
unless you're going to rent a
comedian,
venue?
but as
Unless
a
you're going to rent
comedian,
a
aren't you
venue.
offended as a comedian? You're
Oh,
like,
100%.
yeah,
100%, because they say it's a comedy show. And what it really is story time. Right? There's a big difference. And so they still put it on as a comedy show, even though it's not. It's them telling funny anecdotes about their career or funny stories, and people go and enjoy those stories. And I'm not knocking that, but it's a lot different than that person spending hours and hours on one joke, grinding it out in open mics in front of 3 people at 1 a.m. trying to get the punchline just right or fix the premise or the setup, or not the premise, but the setup, or why is this not working? This, I mean, that's what real comics do with their jokes, is like, man, there's something missing from this. And I'll work on one joke for weeks and weeks and weeks. I might work on one line. I know Andy Huggins, I've seen him. We've shared a hotel room before, and I have watched him mull over a word for 3 hours.
mm,
One word, 3 hours. And he'll sit there and scratch it out. And he'll write another word in it. He'll read it and he'll scratch it out. And I'm like, Andy, but that's why he's great.
mhm.
And that's what it takes. And then you got these guys that come in and go, I remember this one time I was on the set of this porn. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, because there's no other venues that can do that unless they rent the venue, pay
Mhm.
for a staff. It's just easier to go to a comedy club and go, hey, give me a door deal. I'll give you 10% of the door. You keep all the alcohol and food. I get 90%, plus merch, plus they pay for a meet and greet. They pay $50 to shake my hand and take a picture, and everybody happy. Everybody wins.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think we'll continue to see more and more of that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
always. I don't think
Yeah.
it ever goes away. Yeah.
Mhm.
Why would it?
Mhm.
Everybody's winning,
Mhm.
everybody's winning. And it really doesn't take away from comics, because 99% of the time, those are happening on off nights. It's on a
Mhm.
Wednesday or a Sunday, or,
Mhm.
they're not doing that Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then those are nights where real comics are doing comedy. Those
Yep.
are always on a Tuesday or whatever. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Have
those, honestly, I remember I was at a festival in California, and there was a Booker panel that I was sitting in on, and they were really talking about YouTube comics. And this was years ago when it was first kind of becoming a thing, and a lot of us comics were annoyed by it. And they said, instead of getting mad about it, why don't you collaborate with them, get your numbers up? And even back then, I didn't pay attention to that. I should have,
Mm.
but it was good advice. But they
Mhm.
said something that made a lot of sense even then. And they were like, hey, look, and that's where you heard me say it earlier. It's a butts and seats business. And those comics that we're bringing in on a Tuesday, and they're selling out the room, that can only do 10 minutes on stage, they're paying for the weekends where we bring you into headline and you only sell 50 tickets. So maybe be thankful that they come in on a Wednesday or Tuesday, and
Mhm.
sell it out. And that's kind of the same thing with the Ron Jeremys and the Stormy Daniels of the world for some of
Mm.
these rooms where they'll go in and
Yeah.
sell it out and pack the place and do
Yeah.
2 shows on a Wednesday. The
Mhm.
club makes a killing and everybody's happy.
Yep, yep. I mean, they're characters in their own right, which is kind of funny, I guess, but still it's like, man, they just didn't earn their dues like a comedian that's really put in the time. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So
true.
we're getting here toward the end, and I have one last question.
Sure.
Can you share any upcoming projects or shows that your fans can look forward to?
Gosh, my schedule is so weird right now. Um I'm really booking literally week to week, and it seems like I'll have a fallout and then it'll get replaced. It's almost like the universe is just like, hang tight, we're working on something, but it's just enough to kind of keep me hanging in there, right? So, like, I've had 2 things fall out in the last 2 weeks, but then I had 2 things just get added the next day for months from now. So, my schedule is just crazy, and I don't really have any projects in the work as far as comedy goes. I do have a podcast or a sports talk show that I do because I was on ESPN radio here in Houston for 7 years and stopped doing that. And you mentioned it at the beginning. So that's really, it gets a lot of my time when I'm not doing comedy. I do my show. It's called Barry on Deck, but the YouTube channel is called Barry on Sports. So all the sports stuff that I do goes to that YouTube channel. So when I'm not doing comedy or shows, I'm kind of spending time on that.
Yes, yes. And I'll put a link to that down in the description box
Thank you.
and also to your social media links to get
Please
those
follow
numbers
me on
up.
social media so these clubs will keep booking me.
Subscribe,
Yeah,
comment,
and
all that
buy a
stuff.
ticket, come to a show because it's so funny. I always encourage people to like and follow and that's good. And I really am working on this with my friends and family. And you've probably seen this, Lisa, on my Facebook page too. And I get so frustrated, but I've had people like message me and be like, "You're so mean." I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "You're so mean because you're kind of a jerk to us." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Well, you just are so blunt about nobody supporting you." I'm like, "Well, they don't." And then I had to realize I don't think people understand the business, kind of what we've talked about for the last hour and how important it is. I think people understand, or I think people think if they hit follow, that's where it ends. And it's really that's where it begins because for us, it's not just about the follow. You have to now interact on social media, right? We're all slave to the algorithm if we're doing social media. You know this with a podcast and on YouTube. Now you've got to get people to not just watch your podcast on YouTube, but now they've got to click like. Now they have to click subscribe. Now they have to share it with people. They have to because all of that factors in. So if you watch a joke of mine and you like it, yes, please hit the heart or the like, but also send it to one friend. Send it like I just uploaded a joke last night about going to the gym. And so if you got a gym buddy and you thought the joke was funny, send it to them. Or if
Mhm.
you see another comic that you like their joke and you think of makes you think of somebody or send it to them because
Mhm.
that's what helps them with the algorithm, right? Also save it. Even if you're not going to go back to it, that helps with the algorithm. And
Mhm.
then when you see them have a show that you can make, buy a ticket, go to
Yes,
the
yes,
show.
yes.
That's all. That's the name of the game.
Currently,
The
yeah,
follow is just the beginning. It's a lot of work for our
yeah,
fans. I get it. It
yep,
is.
yep. And
But
just
I liken it as, hey, we're all in this together.
and it's evolving. So be prepared for the evolution that's going to happen with comedy. And we don't have a crystal ball. What definitely things are going to change with technology, and we'll just have to adapt like we always have.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. Well, thank you, Barry. I appreciate you coming on my channel today. And I hope you guys got a lot out of our talk about the business of stand-up comedy. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like and leave a comment down below. Tell, Barry some thoughts
See?
on the
All
things.
that's for the algorithm and share it with a friend.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. And thank you, Barry. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thanks for watching.